Look at you, filthy, weak, crawling in the dirt. You are nothing but slaves, born to serve me. Bow before me. Bring your grain and gold, you peasants owe everything to Pharaoh and to me.
The sun slowly rose from the east, casting its first golden rays across the endless desert sands. The Egyptian sky, a deep blue, was as vast as a giant silk scarf stretched out by the god Rhea each morning. I sat up and took a deep breath. The night's chill still lingered, but I knew that in a little while the sun would melt this whole land into a furnace. My new day began like any other, a day with nothing special about it, or so I thought. My small hut was by the Nile. It wasn't a real house, just a shack hastily built from thatched mud, and a few scraps of wood scavenged from the pyramid construction site. This place couldn't shield us from the scorching summer heat, nor could it block the biting sandstorms of winter. But for me and my family, it was the only place we called home. My wife was starting the fire. The acrid smoke from dried cow dung mixed with straw rose up, stinging my nostrils. She was trying to reheat some dry barley bread from yesterday for our breakfast. On a torn goatskin, my son sat waiting, his dark eyes wide open, not with excitement, but with hunger. He stared at the tiny piece of dry bread in his mother's hand as if his entire world was contained within it. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't. My heart tightened. I knew that if I couldn't do something today, the children in the village, my son included, would grow thinner, until they were nothing but skin and bones. I stepped outside, shouldering my worn-out hoe. It was my most precious possession. The wooden handle was worn smooth, the iron was riddled with rust, but it was still with me as I tilled the soil, the only thing I had to produce a meager crop of barley. When I reached the fields, the whole village was already bustling. Men, women, children, everyone was working. Some were carrying water from the Nile, some were plowing the hard earth, and others were gathering dry grass for the goats. But no matter how hard we tried, I knew that most of that effort was not to feed our own families, but to feed those high above, the Pharaoh, the royal family, the officials, and the temples. I once heard a priest say, "The people are like the bricks in a pyramid. Each one must lay himself down to raise the one above him higher." At the time, I just scoffed, because I knew that the bricks buried below would never see the sun again. Amidst this hardship, I sometimes found small joys. My son would run to the fields, chattering excitedly about an eagle he saw that morning soaring up from the riverbank. He said, "Father, one day I'll be as strong as an eagle, fly high, and escape this place." I looked at him and laughed, but a dream suddenly sparked within me. I wished my son would not have to live a life like mine, a life of toiling to feed others. My wife also used to sing. Her voice wasn't as clear as the singers in the temples, but it was as sweet as honey. Her singing made me forget my fatigue, if only for a moment. But despite the songs and the dreams, a shadow still loomed over my life. I remembered last year's severe drought. The fields cracked, the river ran low, and the villagers were starving. Yet, the officials still came to collect taxes. They took all the grain, leaving me and everyone else with only a few small handfuls. When a man from the village stepped forward to beg, he was beaten to death right in front of his wife and children. That image has haunted me ever since. I swore to myself, if one day I too was pushed to the brink, I would not remain silent like him. That noon, as I was digging my hoe into the earth, I heard the sound of horse hooves in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a merchant caravan. But then, the clang of metal against metal and the sound of shouting erupted. A cloud of dust rose from the main road leading into the village. My heart began to beat faster. I didn't know it then, but deep down I could feel it. The thing I feared and hated the most had returned. And from that moment, an ordinary day would turn into a fateful one. The sound of hooves grew closer. The ground trembled, and dust flew thick in the air, blurring the view of the young green barley fields. I leaned on my hoe, squinting at the main road. A troop of cavalry appeared, a dozen or so men, clad in gleaming iron armor, carrying round shields and curved swords. In the middle of the troop was a small canopied chariot, its wooden wheels clattering on the ground. On the chariot sat a fat man with a short neck and sagging cheeks, wrapped in a red robe and adorned with gold bracelets that glinted in the sun. He was the tax collector whose name every villager knew. Pacer. The villagers who were plowing and carrying water all stopped, watching in silence. No one said a word, but I could feel the heavy breathing of every person. The official stepped down from the chariot, two soldiers helping him because his belly was so large he moved with difficulty. He was chewing a piece of dried meat, spat the gristle onto the ground, and then growled, "Listen up, you scum. It's time to pay your taxes. Quickly offer up all your barley, honey, goats, and sheep. Any delay is a crime of disrespect to the Pharaoh." His voice echoed like a hollow drum in my head. An old man stepped forward, trembling. He bowed his back, his voice cracking. "Great official, this season's drought has left little grain. Please, let us keep a little, otherwise our children and grandchildren will starve to death." The official looked at the old man as if he were a scrawny dog. He let out a scornful laugh. "If you starve, that's one less useless mouth to feed. The Pharaoh's belly is more important than yours." Then he barked at his soldiers. "Search everything. Don't leave a single grain behind." The soldiers stormed into every hut. Screams erupted. Women were shoved to the ground, children cried hysterically, and the few sacks of grain were dragged out and spilled onto the dirt. I clenched the handle of my hoe, hot blood rushing to my head. I saw my wife trying to clutch a small sack, the last of the grain, just enough to feed our son for a few days. A soldier snatched it from her, pushing her to the ground. My son burst into tears and ran toward her, but he too was shoved away. I couldn't take it anymore. I lunged forward, wrestling the sack of grain from the soldier's hands. "Stop, you've taken everything. Let us live." The official approached, squinting at me. He smiled, a heavy, greasy smile. "Oh, a peasant dares to speak? Who do you think you are? The Pharaoh? A god?" Then he snarled, "Beat him." A wooden club struck my back hard. I collapsed, blood trickling from the back of my neck. The crack of bone made my ears ring. I tried to get up, but another kick sent me sprawling. My face hit the dirt, the smell of hot sand and acrid blood filling my nostrils. Before my eyes, my son was screaming, my wife clutching him, trembling. A soldier swung his sword, knocking the small bread bowl from his hand. The piece of bread fell into the sand, covered in dirt, completely lost. I could hear the ragged breathing of the villagers around me. No one dared to step forward, but their eyes burned with fire. I understood the flame was waiting for a spark. The official turned to the whole village, his voice booming. "Listen here, you insects. You live only because the Pharaoh allows it. Your grain, your women, your children, they all belong to the Pharaoh. You have nothing of your own. If he needs to, the Pharaoh will take your lives as well. Remember that." After he finished, he continued chewing his dried meat and spat the remains right next to my face. In that moment, I felt the blood boil in my veins. The pain no longer mattered. The hunger, the humiliation, my son's cries, it all merged into a furious wave. I struggled to my feet. My hands were shaking, but I still gripped my hoe tightly. "Enough." I screamed, the sound erupting from my burning chest. Everyone froze. Even the soldiers paused for a moment. I pointed at the official, my voice a low growl. "We have nothing left to lose. You take our grain, you snatch the bread from our children's hands. If we kneel today, they will take our lives tomorrow." A heavy silence fell. The desert wind hissed past, whipping up the dust. Then, from the crowd, a shout answered back. "Enough! then another and another. He's right. We can't take it anymore. We are men, not animals. Trembling hands reached for sickles, clubs, and stones. The villagers' eyes burned. For the first time, I saw fear defeated by fury. The official laughed loudly, but the sound was distorted, laced with a hint of a tremor. You fools! You think you can fight against swords and spears? But in my eyes, he was no longer a god. He was just a mortal, a fat man, trembling as he was surrounded by blazing eyes. I raised my hoe high and shouted, "Then let our blood be the proof. Whoever wants to live, stand up." And just like that, the fire erupted. The moment I raised my hoe, my heart pounded like a war drum dot inside my chest. The humiliation, the pain, and the hatred merged into an unquenchable flame. I yelled, "We have nothing left to lose. If living means hunger and shame, then it is better to die in freedom." My voice echoed across the fields, striking a chord in the hearts of the villagers. An old man, who had been silent his whole life, suddenly picked up a stone at his feet and hurled it straight at the soldiers. Loud clang rang out as it struck a piece of armor. Then, like a sudden storm, everyone erupted. Clubs, sickles, hoes, stones, the ordinary tools used for farming now became weapons. The shouts of fury echoed to the heavens. "Enough! For our children! Fight them!" The soldier in front of me charged, his sword flashing. I dodged and swung my hoe. A dry crack echoed, the hoe's blade struck his shoulder, and blood sprayed, turning the sand red. I had never killed anyone before, but in that moment I felt no fear dot in my eyes. He was no longer a man, just the shadow that had oppressed my life for so many years. The others charged in as well. Clubs slammed against armor. Stones were thrown relentlessly. One soldier fell, then another. For the first time in my life, I saw the soldiers' panic dot in my ears. The cries of women and children mingled with the sharp clang of swords. A young man who had only ever known how to plow a field rushed forward, swinging his sickle at a soldier. Blood splattered on his face, but he didn't stop, just kept screaming as he slashed again. An old woman, her back bent, beat a soldier relentlessly with a wooden pestle, screaming, "You've taken everything from us. Now you want our lives too?" The elderly, women, even children throwing stones. Everyone rose up together. The official pacer stood on his chariot, his face pale. He shouted, "You animals, you dare defy the Pharaoh's command? This is treason." But his voice trembled. He called for his guards, but they were struggling to defend themselves. He had never seen the villagers, those he considered livestock, dare to raise weapons. He had never thought that one day those calloused hands would make him tremble in fear. I looked at him and yelled, "You are not the Pharaoh. You are just a greedy leech who sucks our blood. Today, we take back what is ours." The sun was high in the sky. The heat burned our skin, but no one stopped. Sweat, blood, and sand mixed into a red mud beneath our feet. The clang of swords, the thud of clubs, the screams, the neighing of horses, it all merged into a frenzied song. I saw it clearly in the villagers' eyes. There was no more fear. There were only two paths left: to fall in blood, or to rise up and seize justice. In that moment, I knew. For the first time in history, our village had spoken with its own flesh and blood. Despite the fury, I could still see the disparity. Gleaming steel swords against wooden clubs, hard iron armor against bare flesh. A flicker of doubt crossed my mind. Were we strong enough? But then, seeing my son huddled in my wife's arms, I understood. There was no turning back. If I fell, at least I would fall as a man, not as a chained beast. I screamed, raising my blood-stained hoe, "Remember this moment. Even if we fall, our blood will call out for justice. One day, the seed planted today will grow into a tree, and they will tremble before the people." The villagers shouted together, "Justice! Justice!" The cry echoed like thunder, drowning out the sound of hooves, drowning out the clash of metal. That day, in the middle of the blood-soaked barley field, I saw it for the first time. The common people knew they too could roar like thunder. The ground beneath my feet trembled. The soldiers tightened their ranks, their swords and shields gleaming. They had armor, horses, and discipline. And us, the villagers? We only had bamboo sticks, iron sickles, stones, and our calloused hands. But I knew this much: if we retreated, we would lose everything. If we ran, my wife and child would starve. If we remained silent, the officials would return to squeeze us harder, to take even more. Fear and reason screamed in my head, "You cannot win." But my heart roared back, "It is better to fall than to live like trampled weeds." A soldier charged, his sword cutting through the air. I leaned aside and swung my hoe upward. A harsh clang rang out. His sword was knocked from his hand, and the hoe's blade struck his jaw, sending a spray of blood. The whole village roared and surged forward. Sickles slashed at iron armor, bamboo sticks struck faces. A young man threw a stone that hit a soldier's head. He collapsed, his iron helmet flying off. The sound of my own blood pounding in my ears was like a drum, louder than the clash of swords. I realized we could kill them. The battle descended into chaos. A woman grabbed a soldier's hair, pulled him down, and beat him relentlessly with a rock. A boy, no more than 13, rushed in and bit the sword hand of a soldier, giving his father the chance to swing his sickle across the man's throat. The sand under our feet turned red, slippery with blood. There were no longer farmers or soldiers, only two sides, the oppressors and the risen. Amid the chaos, I heard the shrieks of the official pacer. He was hiding in his chariot, his fat trembling, his voice hoarse. "Kill them! Cut down all these traitors! Whoever kills the one with the hoe, I'll reward with gold." He was pointing directly at me. In that instant, I felt dozens of soldiers' eyes fall upon me. But I also saw hundreds of villagers' eyes watching me, waiting for me not to back down. I roared, "Don't be afraid. He only has gold, but we have our blood and our land. This land belongs to us, but the blood of justice does not flow easily." A young man who had charged forward with me was run through with a sword before he could even swing his club. He fell right beside me, his eyes wide open, unable to utter a word. His warm blood soaked my feet. A mother screamed as her son was cut down. But in her despair, she snatched up a sickle, lunged forward, slit the soldier's throat, and then collapsed, clutching her son's body. I understood then that every death was the price the village had to pay for a glimmer of hope. Our roars spread across the fields. People from other huts ran out, carrying sticks, machetes, and stones. At first, there were only a few dozen of us, then it became 100. The soldiers were numerous, but the villagers were more. They were used to fighting in formations, but now they were surrounded from all sides. One soldier tried to ride his horse out, but a rope trap from the fields ensnared its legs. The horse fell, and the soldier was swarmed by villagers, dragged across the ground as weapons rained down on him. I had never seen the villagers like this. The faces that had once been downcast were now held high, their eyes burning like fire. As the sun reached its peak, the tide of the battle had turned. Half the soldiers had been cut down. The rest were slowly retreating. The official was in a panic, sweat pouring down his face, shouting for his chariot to retreat. But the road was blocked. The villagers surrounded him. Hands were raised, eyes burned, all focused on that fat man. He stammered, "You can't. I am an official of the Pharaoh. To touch me is to insult the gods." I stepped forward, my clothes soaked in blood, and raised my hoe. "Your god is just a greedy, fat belly. Our gods are the earth, the river, the blood of our children. And today our gods delivered judgment. I don't remember how I swung. I only remember the spray of blood, the choked scream. The official fell, his eyes staring blankly, his throat slit open. A moment of silence fell. Then the entire village erupted in a roar. It was no longer a cry of fear, but the cry of people who had been born a second time. That day, under the brilliant sun, I saw it, the villagers were no longer livestock tilling the fields. We had become human. As evening fell, the desert wind blew across the field of corpses. We had won, but we had also lost many people. The sound of wailing echoed through the huts. I sat beside my wife and son, my hands caked with dried blood. A question rose in my heart. We have risen up. But what will the Pharaoh do tomorrow with a village that dared to rebel? In that tragic victory, I understood. Today was only the beginning. That evening, the dust had not yet settled. The fields were stained red, a mixture of blood and sunset. On the ground, the bodies of soldiers and villagers lay piled together. The sound of mourning echoed through the hamlet, mingling with the desert wind that whistled through the tattered huts. I sat down on the ground, the blood-stained hoe still in my hand, my heart heavy. In front of me, my wife held our son, her eyes red, her hands trembling. My son had stopped crying, but his small eyes were wide, haunted by the scene he had just witnessed. I suddenly realized I had set myself on a path from which there was no return. From the moment I raised my hoe against the soldiers, the entire village and I had stepped into a pathless darkness. But then, amidst the sorrow, there was a light. The people came to me, gathered around me, looking at me with a new expression, no longer fear, no longer submission, but bright as fire. An old man spoke in a hoarse voice. You did what no one else dared to do. You showed us that we can stand up. A young mother holding an infant said through her tears, My son might starve tomorrow, but he will know his mother did not kneel. That is because of you. Hearing those words, my heart felt tight. I had never seen such light in the villagers before. They were no longer just gaunt farmers, but people who had tasted freedom. Night fell, and the villagers lit a fire in the middle of a wide patch of ground. It wasn't a fire for cooking, but a fire for gathering, the fire of a people who had just learned they could roar. Everyone sat in a circle. A soft song began, not the old work songs, but a new song, born from today's blood and smoke. I looked up at the star-filled sky. The stars had never seemed so bright. I told myself, perhaps the gods are watching us. Perhaps, finally, justice will come. For a moment, I believed that we had planted the seed for a different tomorrow. And yet, as everyone slowly became lost in the song and the firelight, another worry stirred in my heart. I knew the news of this rebellion could not be hidden. A tax collector killed, the Pharaoh's soldiers defeated, it was an insult to the court of the highest order. The Pharaoh, sitting on his throne in Memphis, would not let this stand. He would send more soldiers, more elite warriors, and perhaps even the sorcerers from the temples. I imagined the army marching toward us, thousands of soldiers, their armor gleaming, war drums thundering against us with only our clubs, sickles, and stones. A shiver ran down my spine. That night, I could not sleep. I walked around the village, looking at the dark huts, listening to the sound of children sobbing in their dreams, and hearing the whispered lullabies of women. I understood that I had to do more. Otherwise, all the blood shed today would be for nothing. I whispered an oath to myself amidst the darkness and the desert wind. If the storm comes, I will not run. If the Pharaoh's army arrives, I will stand in the front line. If blood must be shed, let mine be the first to flow. For I no longer live for myself alone, but for this entire village, for all who have suffered hunger, the lash, and humiliation. From this day on, I am not just a farmer. I am the first hoe of the rebellion. The next morning, the dawn stained the sky red. But it was not the brilliant red of hope, but the red that foretold disaster. A man came running from the north, panting heavily. He fell to his knees, his face pale, his voice cracking. The Pharaoh's army, they've heard the news. They are gathering, they could be here in a few days. The entire village fell silent. The joy of victory had not yet blossomed before it turned into dread. All eyes turned to me. I understood then from this point on, I had become the reluctant leader of a war for which no one was ready. The news that the Pharaoh's army was gathering spread through the village like fire through dry straw. Within a day, every hut knew. Women whispered worriedly, children sobbed, and men looked at each other with somber eyes. The brief joy of yesterday's victory vanished, leaving a heavy void. Everyone knew we had crossed a line from which there was no return. Someone whispered, "What if we flee? Abandon the village and find somewhere else to live?" Another trembled. "How can we fight the Pharaoh's army? They number in the thousands, and we are only a few hundred and empty-handed at that." I heard it all. Their words were like knives twisting in my gut. But I knew if I also remained silent, everything would fall apart. That evening, I had a large fire lit in the center of the village square. Everyone gathered, surrounding the flickering light. The desert wind blew, making the flames dance, illuminating tired and fearful faces. I stood up and raised my voice. "Brothers, we have killed the tax collector. We have struck down the Pharaoh's soldiers. Their blood still stains this ground. Do you think the Pharaoh will spare us? No. Even if we run, even if we kneel, they will still find us, kill our men, capture our women, and turn our children into slaves." A murmur went through the crowd. I raised my hoe high, my voice a growl. There is only one path: to stand up again. No more running, no more hiding. We will turn this village into a fortress, turn our working hands into swords and spears, and turn yesterday's blood into a guiding flame. My voice boomed, drowning out the wind. There was a moment of silence, and then from the crowd, a shout erupted, "Stand up!" Then more voices joined in until the whole village was roaring, "Stand up!" In the firelight, I saw their fear slowly dissolve, replaced by the fire in their eyes. From that day on, the village was no longer just a village. It became a barracks. The strong young men gathered, training with bamboo sticks, hoes, and sickles as if they were spears and swords. The elders sat sharpening bamboo, turning them into rows of stakes. The women gathered stones, piling them on the roofs of huts and along the fences, ready to rain down on the enemy. The children stood guard in the distance, acting as our eyes and ears, raising the alarm at any sign of movement. I and a few others drew a map of the village in the sand. We discussed how to set traps. Pits filled with stakes, rock walls, ropes to ensnare the horses' necks. Every day, I saw the villagers change. They were no longer just farmers. They were becoming warriors of the land. We had no bronze swords, no iron armor. But I knew we had a stronger weapon, this land itself. I told them, they are strong on the open battlefield, but here, every stone, every bamboo grove, every field belongs to us. Let's turn our fields into a tomb for the Pharaoh's army. The people nodded. A new belief was rising. That night, no one in the village slept. Everyone worked in silence, setting traps, digging pits, sharpening spears. The sound of cracking bamboo, of stones being stacked, of ragged breaths, mingled with the wind. I walked among the rows of people, placing a hand on their shoulders, speaking softly. Tomorrow, blood may stain this entire village red. But if we fall, let us fall as men, not as chained beasts. A young boy, only 15, looked up, his eyes bright. "Leader, if I die, will my name be remembered?" I choked up, then placed my hand on his chest. "You will be remembered. Not by stone tablets in a temple, but by these fields, by every generation to come. Every stalk of grain that grows will speak of your blood." The next morning, as the sun peeked over the horizon, I stood on a high mound, looking at the prepared village. No one could hide their fear. Eyes still trembled. Hands were still damp with sweat. But beneath the fear, I saw something else. Belief. The belief that we would no longer kneel. The belief that, no matter the outcome, we had proven that farmers could also be masters of their own destiny. I took a deep breath, roared, and raised my hoe high. The storm is coming, but we will not tremble, because today we are the first to dare challenge the Pharaoh. A roar answered back like thunder. No trembling, no kneeling. In that moment I knew the bloodstorm was about to arrive. And I, who was once just a farmer tilling the fields, had now become the guiding flame for an entire village. That morning the sun was like a bloody orb. We stood waiting, each person gripping a bamboo stick, an iron sickle. No one spoke a word. Everyone knew. Today could be the last day for the entire village. Then, from the horizon, a cloud of dust rose. The sound of war drums thundered. The Pharaoh's army had arrived. When I saw the thousands of soldiers in their gleaming armor, I felt my legs begin to tremble. But I clenched my jaw and told myself, no, I cannot tremble, because if I tremble, they will all collapse with me. Beside me were gaunt faces with burning eyes, my wife holding our small child, an old man leaning on a staff, young men clutching bamboo stakes. All of them waited. A general on a black horse rode forward. His voice boomed like thunder. You rebellious villagers! You have killed a tax collector and cut down the Pharaoh's soldiers. That is the crime of treason. All of you kneel. Surrender your leader, and the rest will be spared. If not, this village will be burned to the ground. The village went silent. Everyone's eyes turned to me. I stepped forward, raised my hoe, and shouted, we are not traitors. We only fought against the greed of the tax collector. He stole all our grain and beat our women and children. If the Pharaoh knew, would he side with us, or with the thief in an official's robe? The general sneered coldly. Insolence. Anyone who defies an official defies the Pharaoh. He raised his hand to signal. The soldiers tightened their ranks. The villagers gripped their crude weapons. I took a deep breath. If this was death, I would die as a man. Just as I was about to shout charge, another horn blast sounded from behind the Pharaoh's army, not a war horn, but a ceremonial one. The army halted and parted. A golden chariot advanced, draped with blue silk curtains and surrounded by guards. It felt as if the entire desert held its breath. A high-ranking official dressed in white stepped down. He did not draw a sword, but held up a scroll bearing the Pharaoh's seal. His voice rang out for all to hear. Hear the order of the Pharaoh Lord of the two lands, illuminated by a ray. The entire village and all the soldiers fell silent as stone. The official opened the scroll and read aloud, through an investigation by the court. The truth has been made clear. The tax collector in this region acted on his own to increase taxes, seize grain, and torment the good people to enrich himself. The villagers rising up against him was not an act of rebellion, but an act against a traitor to the Pharaoh. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I stood frozen. I couldn't believe my ears. The official continued, his voice clear and strong. The Pharaoh orders, this village is pardoned of all crimes and will not be punished. The corrupt official is to be stripped of his titles, put in chains, and taken to Memphis to be executed before all the people. Those who bravely defended their village and upheld justice will be rewarded with grain and new farming tools. This is the command of the Pharaoh, the justice of Ra. For a moment, no one could speak. Then suddenly sobs broke out, mingling with cheers. People hugged each other, tears streaming down their faces. A trembling old man fell to his knees, choking out the words, Rhea still sees us. The Pharaoh is still just. My wife clutched our son and burst into tears. I saw my son's eyes, shimmering with light, not the light of fear, but of faith. I let my hoe fall, knelt, and looked up at the sky. A long sigh escaped me, one of both relief and overwhelming emotion. We did not die. We were not wiped from the face of the earth. And most importantly, we were heard. That day, the Pharaoh's army did not kill. They withdrew. The tax collector was dragged away, his face ashen, his screams useless. We, the farmers who had once lived in fear, stood and watched him chained like an animal. In that moment, I knew, justice may come late, but it does not disappear. As night fell, the fire in the village was lit once again. But this time, it was not a fire of fear, but a fire of hope. I sat in the circle, watching everyone sing. Someone touched my shoulder and said quietly, "Leader, because of you, we are still alive." I shook my head and smiled. No, it is because of all of us. Because we dared to stand up. Before the fire, I said to myself, the Pharaoh may be distant, but justice is never extinguished. From now on, I will live not just for my family, but for this whole village, for all those who once trembled in the darkness. Because today I have seen that a single hoe can echo like thunder, and a small village can shake a throne. And I believe that from that day on, Egypt was different.